It is time for our May reading wrap-up, and I'm pretty proud of myself, dude, because 15 books? Yeah, it happened. I know, because I was there. Now, I did tally that up, of course, and the total was 4,439 pages, which I think is the record for the year at this point, maybe ever. Who can say? So basically, I'm really proud of how this month turned out, and I think mostly it was because I didn't keep a record as tightly as I usually do this month. Usually when I finish a book, I mark it off my list, I put it in my journal, I mark it on Goodreads, and I just am really paying attention to whether or not I'm reading or meeting my goals. This month I didn't really think about it too much and I just sort of went for it, and I don't know if that somehow just let things happen without overthinking it, but whatever the magic that happened this month, I'm glad that it did, because April was not a good reading month, as you know if you watched that wrap up. So this month we more than made up for it, and I don't know, it was just a fun reading month and a huge variety of goods, mediums, and definitely bads. If you've been here before, then you know how this works. I split up my reading wrap-ups into 3 categories so that you know whether or not something is worth your time. Essentially, I do the buy it books that I thought were great and totally recommend. Then we have borrow it books that are sort of middle of the road reads. They were okay, they weren't amazing, they weren't bad, they just were there, and you can use your own distinction to see if there's something that interests you enough to maybe give it a shot. And then books that I call skip it books that I say not at all worth your time, no matter what the media or reviews say. I did not like it, and I'll explain why. So you can just stay for as long or as little as your heart tells you. You can just watch the best of the best, add those to your reading list, or you can stay through the borrow it and the skip it sections to know what books to maybe avoid or look out for next time you're shopping around the bookstore or perusing Amazon. If you're ready, I'm ready. We do have 15 books to get through, so I hope you have a cup of tea or a snack, and I'll try to be as brief as possible without forgetting anything, and let's go ahead and dive into this thing. Of course, we're starting with the best of the best, the buy it books, and the first of those is Rob Walker's The Art of Noticing, 131 Ways to Spark Creativity, Find Inspiration, and Discover Joy in the Everyday. I'll be honest, I did not have high expectations going into this when Knopf sent it to me, but now that I've read it, I'm absolutely obsessed with it. I think it's a must-have for any creative. The reason I say that is because often when you get books that are prompts, whether you're a writer or an artist or what have you, you get a lot of books on the market that just say, do this or think in this way, and sometimes I find that kind of limiting instead of nurturing or inspiring the creative self. I think it has the opposite effect. I still think that those are helpful in their own way, but really what I'm looking for in those books is just something to spark my mind, to spark my imagination again. And that's surprisingly hard to find, but it's exactly what Rob Walker does in this book, and that's why I think it's so perfect. It's never limiting. All it's doing is giving you little techniques or strategies or exercises that are gonna help you see the world around you in a different way. It's perfectly done. It's broken into sections based on the senses. So you have one for like sight and hearing, and each entry is only a page or 2. There's these cute little illustrations throughout, and I think it's just a great handy book if you ever feel creatively stuck, if you ever feel just blah about the world around you and you want to sort of look at the world with like a child's eye. You remember when you were a kid and you would just look around and everything seemed magical? That's what this book will reawaken in you, and I just totally recommend it. If you're creative, you have to get this. I will force you into it. Next in the best of the best is Girl Waits with Gun by Amy Stewart. This is book 1 in the Cop Sisters series. If you've seen my Books for Nature Lovers video, you'll know that I adore Amy Stewart. She has written nonfiction as well, obviously, if she's on that list. So it's interesting that she could be able to bridge the genre gap and go into such a fantastically written and supremely enjoyable historical fiction. This series is actually based on a real-life woman, Constance Kopp, and it has been such fun to read. The publisher, HMH Books, was kind enough to send me the entire series. There's another one coming out in September, so I have an arc for that as well, and I am so excited to be able to catch up in time for that release. So you'll probably be seeing a few of these as I go through the series. It's just so freaking fun. It's just a great 4.5 star read. One of those books that's easy to recommend to people. I love that it's based on some real events, and I think she just does it so well. Like, it's hard for me to even describe it to you, but it's just fun, and I totally recommend it if you love historical historical fiction and mysteries. If you love historical fiction and mysteries, then this is a great combo deal for you. I enjoyed it a lot, and my mother-in-law wants to borrow it. My husband is reading it now, so I'm pretty sure this is going to be a series that just sort of makes the rounds in the family, and I hope you'll join us and read it too, because it's just been so fun. So yes, this is book 1, Girl Waits with Gun, in the Kopp Sisters series. Next up in Best of the Best is Ask Again Yes by Mary Beth Keane. I did make a review video for this, so suffice it to say, this is a multi-generational family saga about 2 NYPD police officers, how they're briefly connected on the job, and then how they remain connected by becoming neighbors. And we're basically going through the narrative of their lives, their wives' lives, and their children's lives. It's a really, really great book. I only had one complaint about it, which was that the ending wasn't as strong as the rest of the book, but even with that being said, this book as a whole is fantastic, and I definitely recommend it. Next up is a reread, and I've just been in the mood for this lately. I don't know if you have books that are sort of comforting reads to you that you just reach for when you're not feeling well or feeling sad or whatever. I was not feeling well lately, like in my stomach, just being a jerk. But so I decided to reach for The Lord of the Rings on audiobook, and this is my favorite of the trilogy, which is The Return of the King. It's the last one, and I like it because it has the most Samwise, and Samwise is my favorite. He is my book husband, and I just find it so comforting. Like, it's like a hug, you know? Some books are just like that, and it's set in such a fantasy world that it's truly an escape. Like, you're in a different existence when you're reading this, and that is really helpful when you're feeling ouchy on the inside. I say this every time I bring up this series, but if you haven't read Lord of the Rings and you struggled with it but you want to, then try the audiobook. It makes a world of difference. I truly think some books are better listened to, and this series is one of them. What's funny is that I think I reread this book like not even 6 months ago. I think I reread it at the end of the last year, but whatever, you can't stop me. When I want Tolkien, I want it, okay? So I just went for it. And just FYI, I think next month I'm gonna listen to some of the continuation in the Tolkien series, so I'll let you know how that goes. Last of the best is The Second Mountain by David Brooks. This took me like 2 months to read, so I'm sorry that it just took me that long, but it is a lengthy and hard to explain book. When I showed you this the first time in my new releases video for the month it came out, I told you it was really hard to describe, and that's still very true. I think sometimes that's a benefit of the book, and sometimes I think that's a detriment of this book. Here's the best way I can explain this, or at least the base concept for this book, at least as how it sells itself, though what it is a little bit different in reality. Essentially, this whole second mountain idea is based on this. You go through life and you want to achieve the first mountain. Now, the first mountain in this analogy is outward success, success for the ego. So feeling good in your career, feeling good with your family, feeling like you've basically accomplished finite goals. The concept for this book is the second mountain, which is the journey of the inner self, and the inner self in relation to community and needs greater than the individuals. David Brooks' argument, or his setup for this book, is essentially some people get to the top of the first mountain and they think, is this it? So he wants to explore the second mountain, what it means to get there, and all the different ways you can achieve that. A lot of this book is a social commentary, a lot of it's philosophy, some of it's self-help. So it's hard for me to 100% recommend to people just because it has so many things going on at once. Some parts of it I completely related to. It was like seeing my thoughts on paper, you know? And I think that's a really powerful experience. Some bits, though, I really thought didn't belong in this book. They seemed a little bit beyond the scope of the work, and that can be kind of frustrating just because you go in with a certain expectation and looking to get a certain value from a book. So it's hard for me to recommend, but I didn't want to put it in the borrow it pile because I truly think there's some really good gems in here. It's just, I think if you want to get this book and you're interested in that conversation, then you have to go in knowing that it's not the most well-structured book or the most consistent book, but it still has good bits to it. So this is sort of a on the edge one before we dive into the borrow it books, but yes, that is the total for the books that I completely recommend and think are worthy of being added to your list. But now we're going to get into the borrow it and then the skip it books. So if all you wanted was the best of the best, I'll see you later on the next one. But if you want to keep going and know which books to be aware of or look out for, then let's get into them. First up in the borrow it books is Ruff Animals by Rae Del Bianco. Rae is someone I knew through Instagram, a fellow book blogger. She takes truly gorgeous images. You have to check her out. And I was really excited to read her book because we're sort of, we have a similar interest, which I don't think too many people of our age group are interested in, which is sort of more rougher, sometimes more traditional reads like Cormac McCarthy. Dennis Johnson. Books that are hard to define, but other than their sort of ruggedness and this sort of unique style that's lyrical and simple at the same time, it's really hard for me to express. So I was really excited to read her book, and I did really enjoy this, and that is why is it at the top of the borrow it section, because again, it's one of those ones that I feel could go either way depending on your preference as a reader. I have absolutely no doubt that Ray is going to produce some truly fantastic books in her lifetime, and this is a great debut. There's so much about it that I liked. It's an extremely visual book. I mean, it could be made into a movie and you sort of feel like you're watching one as you're reading it. It's like No Country for Old Men in a way. What we've got going on here plot-wise is basically two twin siblings who have been running a really secluded farm in the middle of Utah. They don't really talk to anyone. It's basically just the two of them, and they're really struggling to keep the farm afloat, and it's all they have, so they're just willing to do anything it takes to keep it. The main way that they do stay afloat is by being in the cattle industry. Now, they've got just enough to scrape by when one morning Wyatt, the male of the two twins, walks outside to discover one of his bulls has been killed. Now, suddenly, shots are fired, things go back and forth. This one incident leads on a whirlwind chase of a young girl who is extremely mysterious, involved in drug cartels, but has her own really dark, riddled history, all catapulting into violence and gore as Wyatt tries to maintain his family's holdings. So there's a lot I like about this. A lot of it is just beautifully, beautifully written, and parts of it are superbly fast-paced. But overall, and I can't quite tell you why, I could not give it all the way 4 stars. Maybe it was because at times it seemed really, really slow, maybe at times it seemed crowded, and at times I wanted to see the characters more. Now, the whole character development and the style is all part of this genre, so I don't feel like it's really fair to have that as a reason exclusively, but for whatever reason, for me, this was a 3.5-star read. I did enjoy it. I think a lot of people would really enjoy it. If you're at all interested in the description or this style, then I say go for it and see how it is for you. Next up is How Not to Die Alone by Richard Roeper. I did do a review video for this as well, and it is, in my opinion, a middle-of-the-road, borrow it type of book. This is Richard Roeper's debut, and it's a transformative novel about a man named Andrew who's been lying about the reality of his family life. But lies that big can only go on for so long, and eventually he finds himself in a social situation where he wants to progress and move forward from this lie, but he's going to decide how to do it and if he should do it at all. There's parts of this that I really like. It's got good British humor, and if you're interested in this book, then definitely check out the full review. But it is just a borrow it book in my opinion. Next up, I'm going to do 4 at once, and I promise there's a reason. It's because they're all in a series. I read the first 4 Narnia books all over again. My same childhood editions are in my hand today. These are the ones I read as a kid, and I think it's so cool that I still have them. I did reread them on audiobooks though, and I don't know why I decided to pick them up again. I was just looking at my shelves the other day and I thought, you know what? I'm gonna reread the Narnia series. So that's exactly what I did, and I decided I would go at least through Prince Caspian, which is the 4th. I mean, depending on where you count The Magician's Nephew, but I count it as book 1. I have to say, reading these though as an adult was a really different experience. I've reread these as a teenager multiple times, and I don't know why this time it just wasn't doing it for me. I don't know. I guess it's one of those things that I think is really great for children, and I'm in no way saying that this series isn't as good as I've always loved it, because of course I still love it. I just think it's better for children than adults. Some children's books can cross over into adult reading and be perfectly enjoyable from a child's perspective or an adult's perspective. These are just really simplistic, more simplistic than I remembered. Some of like the lessons and the plots and stuff, I just don't feel anything about it anymore. So I decided I'm actually gonna stop reading these. I'm not gonna finish through book 7 because I want to remember it as a child, like as my childhood self remembers them. And I want to just keep them for if I ever have kids, I'll keep them for them. But I don't know, I'm just not gonna read it anymore. So if you've never read these, and you know, or if you have kids, then they're great books for kids, really fun. Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, Prince Caspian, Magician's Nephew, there's a few movies made, so they're just fun, but I don't know, it's just not working for me right now, or maybe anymore, so I don't know. I still love them. I don't want you to think I don't love Narnia, because I do. It's just not the same for me anymore, and I think it's time I just respected the memory of them and let them be. The last book in the Borrow It series is actually a book that I got for $1 at the library book sale. If you saw my reading vlog video, then you might have remembered this. This is a book I knew absolutely nothing about, a journal from a man I knew absolutely nothing about, so that was kind of a fun experience. The reason it's on the Borrow It list is because this is relatively obscure. Some people know who this man is and really respect him and therefore want to research his thoughts more. But I think if you don't have any relevance to the person, then it's only interesting from almost like a researching perspective, but you're not going to get the same value out of it as, say, someone who's a fan of this man's life and work. It was interesting to read in the sense that this is a man's journal. It's his diary, you know? So at times it was like seeing into someone else's head, and that was really fascinating. Parts of it were so gorgeous and stunning and hit me right in the heart and were just so relatable on a human level that I really enjoyed it. Parts of it were really religious, too much so for me, in the sense that I just got tired of that same dialogue and because I just don't think in the same way. So it's fun to read something that's different from your own mindset. Like, I always think that that's a good idea, but at the same time, you know, it's not going to convert me or change my mind, so sometimes it gets kind of exhausting. And I just think that this is one of those books that I'm glad I picked it up. I'm glad I read it. Some parts of it were so gorgeous and I'm glad that I got those bits, but I don't really go out of my way to recommend it to people. I just think it's just a fun, obscure book that I found and read, and that's pretty much it. That's all for the Borrow It books in like the middle of the road, and now we're going to get into the last 3, which are books that I say skip it. And you might be surprised because I think every single one of these is very well hyped or well represented in the media, so we will see what you think of these reactions. The first of the 3 you already know if you saw my review video for it, which is Stranger Diaries, and this book had so much great potential. It's definitely on the edge of being a borrow it or a skip it, but I'm just probably never going to recommend this eagerly to people because I think there's just better books out there in the same gothic murder mystery genre that I would rather get in people's hands than this one, so it does go in the wrap-up at least on the skip it list for sure. Parts of this I really liked. I just wanted more from the overall execution. If you want the details, check the review video, but for the sake of this wrap-up, just know that I was a little bit let down in how much I was excited by the description, and I didn't think that the way it was fleshed out really met all of what I hoped it would be. So that's it for this one. Let's get into the other 2, which you have not seen yet. So the first of those is The Daughter's Tale by Armando Lucas Correa. You saw this in my May releases video if you did watch that, and this is my reaction to it. I promised you I would let you know how it went, so here we are. Now, I've never read this author before, but he did have a bestseller called The German Girl, which is another World War II era historical fiction. Like a lot of books in this subgenre, this is about the Holocaust. It's about the Jewish experience during such a horrible, tumultuous event in history that we still see the shadow of today. I think reading books in this genre is so important, and if you haven't ever read a book about the Holocaust, then I would really encourage you to do so, and there's tons of great books out there. If you want me to make a list, let me know. However, just because a book is written about a really important topic doesn't mean that the book necessarily does a great job expressing that topic, and that was my issue with this book. I think overall the story itself would have been perfectly fine, but the execution, the novel itself, feels like a first draft. It feels like a rough outline rather than a completed novel. I was really surprised by that, especially because so many elements of the story and the plot are really good. It's just that they're not written in a way that I think illustrates the gravity of these situations that the characters are in. The characters themselves never feel real. The situations they're in never feel real. And I think there's just better books that illustrate this time in history, the emotions that occurred because of it, the repercussions today that occur because of it, and the impact that those events had on our world and our society and our culture. So I do not recommend this. It's kind of a shame because I do think the elements of the story are there. It's just not that well curated as a whole to be put out into the world. So those are my honest thoughts on this. Again, if you want me to recommend you books in the genre, let me know, because I do think and hope that you would read something about that topic, even though it's a really hard one. So let me know. The last book of this wrap-up is actually the first book I read this month. It is The Things She's Seen, another new release. This book is really strangely formatted, authored by a pair of siblings, and it's meant to tell a tale about grief and do it through the lens of the Aboriginal culture in Australia. That being said, I would not be able to define the purpose of this book for you if I had not read the author's note. Now, inherently, I think that causes a bit of a problem. I think I, as a reader, should be able to determine what your message is and be able to relate to it in some way without reading your explanation of it afterward. That basically tells you most of what you need to know about why I rated this book so low. I did give it a 2-star, and frankly, now that I'm holding it, I kind of wonder if it should have been a 1. When I read the reviews, it seemed to me that lots of people are giving it better ratings because of what it's supposed to be doing, which is sharing a bit of the Aboriginal culture, but I don't think it's actually doing that very well, or at least me, someone who doesn't know much about that at all and would very much be intrigued to know more about that. If I can't really gain anything or feel any relation to this story or the characters or the way it's being told, then I think you've missed your mark, because I think the point of writing books, like, they're not the point, but part of the elegance and the appeal of writing books like this is to expose a culture and to share it with people who don't understand it, right? So I would hope that when you read books like this, you would get something or gain something from it, gain empathy or understanding, or just feel like your worldview has been broadened, because I think that's really cool, and that's one of the coolest things about reading books, fiction or nonfiction. But just the execution of this, the story itself, the way it's told, the length is extremely short, and I think it's really hard to pull off a book this short and have it be compelling, especially one about grief. It's written essentially in 2 sections. We have a daughter who has passed away, and she's sort of like a spirit or entity around her father. Her father is the only one who can see her, and they are trying to solve a mystery together in a town. So that aspect sounds really intriguing, right? You sound like, oh, well, that's kind of interesting. But the mystery aspect is just really confusing. It's very muddled, and the way it's explored is through poetry, or I'm not sure if I can count it as poetry. I don't read poetry, but these sort of strange, confusing, long sections where we're basically just doing like a line by line of metaphors that have no relation to anything else that the reader can understand. So I think there's just a lot of problems with it, and that's basically it. I do not recommend this book, and if you have any books that you love that share anything about Australian Aboriginal culture, please let me know, because honestly, it sounds really interesting and I would love to know more about it. So that is it for the books that I say skip it, not worth your time. All in all, there were some great books this month that I definitely recommend. A lot of middle of the road books, a few skip it books, but overall I think it was a pretty good month. I'm really glad with how much I read and all the different experiences they gave me, all the different thoughts they gave me. It was a great month. I would love to know if you had a favorite or a least favorite from May. Definitely drop it in the comments below so we can chat about it. If you liked this video, do me a favor before you hop off and just click that thumbs up button. Drop me a comment below, and if you're new here and you haven't subscribed yet but you do like all things bookish, book reviews, hauls, TBRs, all the good bookish stuff, then I'm your girl. So go ahead, press that subscribe button, and I'll see you on the next one. Thanks for watching. Bye guys.